The cameras flash, the headlines scream, and the world leans in closer than ever before. 5 minutes ago, everything changed. Prince Harry, once the heart of a royal fairy tale, has allegedly made the boldest move of his life, one that no one could have fully prepared for. A move that left Meghan Markle, the woman who walked him down the path of love and rebellion, reportedly breaking down in tears. Divorce. That single word has always carried weight in royal history, but when tied to Harry and Meghan, it shakes the very foundation of everything their story once promised. Yet before we race to conclusions, we need to pause and ask, how did we get here? What really drove Harry to this daring step? And what does Meghan's reaction reveal about the layers of conflict beneath their carefully crafted image? Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a royal marriage unraveling. It's about power, love, betrayal, and the cost of walking away from tradition. Let's rewind for a moment. Think back to the beginning of this saga, when Harry and Meghan's love story felt like something pulled straight from a Hollywood script. The prince who had lived through tragedy, scarred by the loss of his mother and bound by the weight of the crown, finds love in an American actress who was outspoken, independent, and unlike anyone the monarchy had ever embraced before. Their romance captured imaginations across the globe. Meghan wasn't just a new royal bride. She was a symbol of change, diversity, and a modern future. Yet even as the church bells rang and millions tuned in to watch their wedding, cracks in the foundation had already begun to show. The public didn't see it then, but the pressures of palace life, the relentless gaze of the media, and the whispered disapproval from behind gilded doors were waiting to test their union. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the very start, Meghan's journey into the royal family wasn't smooth. Headlines were brutal, comparisons with Kate Middleton constant, and rumors of feuds swirled through tabloids like wildfire. But Harry stood by her. He wasn't just defending his wife. He was defying an institution that had shaped his entire existence. When the couple made their shocking decision to step back from royal duties, it was painted as a mutual choice. Megxit, the world called it, though that very label pinned the blame squarely on Meghan's shoulders. The fairy tale turned into a fight for freedom, but freedom came with a price: isolation, constant criticism, and the struggle to redefine themselves in America. At every step, the spotlight followed, and the once charming story of the royal rebel and his Hollywood princess began to twist into something far darker. Now, we stand at the edge of another turning point. Prince Harry has allegedly chosen to file for divorce. It's not just a legal move. It's a declaration that even love, the very force that once drove him to leave everything behind, has its limits. And Meghan's breakdown, her tears, speak to the human cost of a union battered by forces greater than either of them could control. This isn't a simple breakup. This is a battle between personal freedom and royal duty, between truth and perception, between survival and sacrifice. Divorce in the royal family has always been messy, but when the couple in question have built their brand on independence and unity, the collapse of that brand is more than personal. It's political, cultural, and symbolic. But let's ask the questions that really matter. Was this inevitable? Could any couple survive the relentless war between tabloids, tradition, and truth? Did Harry ever truly escape the shadows of his family? Or did he carry them with him, even across the ocean? And what of Meghan? Was she the architect of her own undoing, or the victim of an institution that never wanted her in the first place? The introduction to this story isn't about easy answers. It's about understanding the complexity of choices made under impossible pressure. Harry's daring royal move is not just a headline. It's a reflection of years of silent battles, whispered conversations, and unspoken pain. As we peel back the layers, we'll journey through the beginning of their love story, the rise of their influence, the bitterness of their break from the monarchy, and the mounting conflicts that may have brought them here. You'll hear the echoes of Diana's legacy, the sharp words of critics, the strategic moves of the palace, and the raw emotion of a woman now faced with the possibility of losing everything she fought for. This is not a story to watch passively. It demands reflection, because at its core, this isn't just about Harry and Meghan. It's about what happens when love collides with power, and when the fairy tale becomes too heavy to carry. Imagine for a moment being in Harry's shoes, torn between the woman you love and the family that defines you. Imagine trying to build a new life while the world watches, critiques, and speculates about every step. Imagine reaching a point where the only way forward feels like walking away from the very person you once vowed to protect against all odds. That is the human side of this story, the part that no headline or gossip column can capture. And it's why this video will take you deeper than the surface-level shock. Because behind every smile at a red carpet event, behind every carefully curated interview, there are moments of doubt, of conflict, of tears shed in private. By the end of this journey, you will see this story in a way the tabloids will never show you. Not as a scandal to laugh at, but as a tragedy to reflect on. Not as the downfall of a celebrity couple, but as a cautionary tale about the price of defying an empire and the toll it takes on love. But don't expect the conclusion to be simple. There are twists, surprises, and revelations waiting. Moments that will change the way you think about both Harry and Meghan. And as we navigate this roller coaster together, you'll be faced with the same haunting question Harry himself must have asked. When everything you've built together starts to crumble, do you fight harder to hold on, or do you finally let go? The air is heavy with whispers, the kind of whispers that echo louder than shouts. The palace walls may be centuries old, but news like this travels faster than lightning. Prince Harry, the boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin with eyes filled with grief, has now taken a step that rewrites his story entirely. The decision to file for divorce isn't just a private matter. It's a declaration that love and rebellion are no longer enough to sustain the life he built with Meghan Markle. And in those same minutes, Meghan herself reportedly broke down, overwhelmed by a reality she perhaps never thought would come. The story has stunned the world, but beneath the surface, this moment is more than heartbreak. It's the climax of years of tension, sacrifice, and choices that demanded impossible trade-offs. When Harry first introduced Meghan to his world, it was as though a fresh wind had blown into the ancient corridors of monarchy. Meghan represented something bold, something daring, something the royal institution wasn't prepared for. She wasn't simply marrying into a family. She was marrying into history, tradition, and an empire of scrutiny. From the very first moment, Meghan carried both the admiration of those who saw her as a symbol of progress and the disdain of those who felt she didn't belong. And Harry, who had always been the royal most willing to break ranks, chose her not just as his wife, but as his partner in defiance. Together, they promised to rewrite the rules. But promises, no matter how passionate, don't erase the pressures of the world they inhabited. Every love story carries its own battles, but Harry and Meghan's love story was unique because their battles weren't just personal. They were public, political, and historic. Their wedding was watched by millions, framed as a modern chapter in an old monarchy. Yet even as vows were exchanged, critics whispered doubts. Could this union survive the relentless assault of the tabloids, the rigidity of tradition, and the expectations placed upon them? Harry believed it could. He once famously said he had to protect his family, echoing the haunting memory of his mother's fate. But perhaps no one asked the harder question. What happens when the act of protection begins to pull a family apart? Fast forward to their departure from royal life. What the world dubbed Megxit wasn't just about stepping back from duties. It was about stepping away from centuries of precedent. Harry and Meghan made the bold choice to carve out independence in America. It was framed as liberation, but the truth was far more complicated. The couple found themselves constantly fighting to prove their worth beyond the crown. Yes, they secured lucrative media deals, but with those deals came criticism that they were trading royal dignity for celebrity fame. Yes, they sought privacy, but paradoxically, their every move seemed to generate more attention. The very act of leaving one cage seemed to land them in another, this time, one built of expectations they had set themselves. So why now? Why this daring move by Harry to file for divorce? To understand, you must step into his shoes. A man who has spent years caught between two worlds. The traditions of his family and the vision of freedom Meghan inspired. At first, he thought he could balance both. He believed love could bridge the gap. But the longer he remained away from the royal fold, the more isolated he became. Relationships with his brother William and father Charles fractured further. Old friends drifted away. And while Meghan offered loyalty, the outside pressures didn't relent. Critics saw cracks in their marriage, though the couple maintained smiles in public. For Harry, the pressure may have finally boiled over. Filing for divorce was not just about leaving Meghan, it was about reclaiming himself. And then there is Meghan. For her, this moment must have felt like betrayal wrapped in shock. She had been portrayed as the outsider, the driving force behind Harry's rebellion, the woman blamed for tearing him away from his family. To now face the possibility of losing Harry too? That's not just heartbreak, that's devastation. Her breakdown, whether in public or private, reveals the toll this story has taken on her spirit. Imagine building your identity on a partnership, only for that foundation to collapse. Imagine believing you were fighting together, only to realize that perhaps you were fighting battles your partner no longer wanted to wage. That's the emotional weight Meghan is rumored to be carrying right now. And it's a reminder that behind the headlines are human beings living through unimaginable pressure. What makes this story so gripping isn't simply the divorce filing. It's the questions it raises about love, loyalty, and survival. Was Harry's move an act of courage, or was it surrender? Did Meghan push too hard against a system too powerful to break? Or was the royal family always destined to win this war of endurance? These aren't easy questions, and they may not have easy answers. But they are the questions that linger in every headline, every social media post, every whispered conversation across the globe. Because Harry and Meghan's story was never just theirs. It belonged to everyone who believed in the fairy tale, who defended them against critics, who saw in them a chance for something new. And when a story that big begins to crumble, the fallout touches us all. The introduction to this saga is about pulling you into the storm before we chart the path it took to get here. You will see how a love that began with promise became a battlefield. You will feel the weight of the choices they made, the words they spoke, the silences they endured. You will watch as allies turned into critics, as smiles turned into sighs, and as unity turned into distance. This isn't just gossip. It's a case study in power, identity, and the fragility of even the strongest vows. By the time we reach the conclusion, you will understand not just what happened, but why it matters. You will be forced to confront the haunting reality that sometimes even the most daring love stories can collapse under the weight of expectation. The opening scene of this story has already set the tone. Harry's decision has shaken the world. Meghan's breakdown has pulled at the world's sympathy, and now the question remains: what comes next? As we journey into the chapters ahead, we'll walk through their history step by step, unraveling the forces that shaped this moment. From the fairy tale beginning to the cracks that widened with time, from the shocking break with the monarchy to the relentless battles in America, every choice and consequence has led us here. This is not just a divorce story. It's the unraveling of a cultural phenomenon, a love story that became a war story, and now, perhaps, a cautionary tale for the ages. And so we begin. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the clearer the picture will become. And the more we uncover, the more you will see that this isn't just Harry and Meghan's story. It's our story too, about what it means to love, to lose, and to fight against forces larger than ourselves. The fairy tale beginning of Harry and Meghan's story is one of those moments where reality seemed to outshine fiction. A young prince, restless and scarred from the shadows of his past, meets an actress who carries both the glamour of Hollywood and the resilience of someone who has carved her own path in life. From the very first moment they met, it seemed as though destiny had scripted this encounter. For Harry, Meghan wasn't just another woman. She was a chance at happiness beyond the rigid walls of tradition. For Meghan, Harry wasn't simply a royal title. He was a man who had lived through tragedy, yet still yearned for love. Their meeting felt like the perfect storm of timing, chemistry, and longing, and it set the stage for what the world would soon call the modern royal romance. Harry's childhood had been defined by the spotlight, often one he never asked for. He grew up as the second son, forever in the shadow of his older brother, William, and shaped by the devastating loss of his mother, Princess Diana. The public had always painted him as the rebel prince. The one caught in scandals, the one making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Yet beneath that image was a man who craved connection and meaning. Meghan, on the other hand, was no stranger to the challenges of building a career in a world that judged her for her race, her gender, and her ambition. She had fought her way to recognition in Hollywood, starring in the series Suits, but she was far from the archetype of a royal bride. And that was exactly what made their story magnetic. They were two outsiders, in their own ways, who found comfort in each other. Their first blind date has been recounted in interviews, described as casual yet electric. Harry was immediately captivated by Meghan's confidence and warmth, while Meghan later admitted she had little preconceived notion of who Harry really was. That honesty, that lack of intimidation, was precisely what drew him in. For a man who had spent his life surrounded by people who either revered or feared his status, here was someone who saw him simply as Harry. In a world where everyone seemed to want something from him, Meghan offered authenticity. Their courtship was swift but deep. They shared private moments away from the cameras, building a bond that felt unshakable. They spoke openly about their values, their passions, and their desire to live a meaningful life. In those early days, everything felt possible. When news of their relationship broke, it was as if the world had been handed a love story it didn't know it was waiting for. Headlines splashed their faces together, describing Meghan as the woman who had captured the prince's heart. The media couldn't get enough. At first, the coverage was enchanted, framing her as a breath of fresh air, a woman of mixed heritage, an actress, an outspoken humanitarian. She symbolized diversity in a monarchy that had long been criticized for being out of touch. Harry's choice was celebrated by many as a sign of progress, a statement that the royal family was ready to embrace change. But behind that excitement lurked the first hints of hostility. Some corners of the press questioned her background, her family dynamics, even her ambitions. It was a foreshadowing of the storm to come. Yet despite the whispers, their engagement was announced with joy. The iconic photographs of Harry and Meghan walking hand in hand at Kensington Palace captured the world's imagination. Harry's words about knowing Meghan was the one from the moment they met resonated with millions. Their love seemed pure, unshakable, and destined to rewrite the rulebook of royal relationships. Even the Queen gave her formal approval, and for a brief period, it seemed as though everyone was swept up in the magic. The wedding that followed became one of the defining moments of the decade. Millions tuned in from around the globe to watch Meghan walk down the aisle at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, wearing a gown that was elegant in its simplicity, her veil embroidered with flowers representing the Commonwealth. It was not just a wedding, it was a statement. This was the future of the monarchy, bold and modern. The day itself was filled with symbolism. The gospel choir singing Stand By Me, the powerful sermon delivered by Bishop Michael Curry, the diverse guest list, it all reflected Meghan's world blending into Harry's. It was a moment that seemed to embody unity and transformation. For many, it felt as though Harry had finally found peace, a love that would heal the wounds of his past. Meghan, too, appeared radiant, stepping into her new role with grace and determination. The images of them riding in the carriage, waving to cheering crowds, were etched into history as proof that love could conquer barriers of race, tradition, and expectation. It was a fairy tale, yes, but it was also a revolution of sorts, one that signaled hope for a more inclusive royal family. But as every fairy tale teaches us, happiness is rarely simple. The beginning of their marriage was filled with joy and anticipation, but it was also the start of their immersion into a life Meghan could never have fully prepared for. Overnight, she went from actress to duchess, from relative freedom to the most scrutinized woman in the world. At first, she tried to navigate the balance, attending royal engagements with poise, smiling for the cameras, and embracing her role. Harry stood proudly by her side, visibly protective, often holding her hand in moments when the pressure seemed overwhelming. Their body language told the story of a couple deeply in love, bound together against the odds. Yet even in this chapter of joy, the cracks were faintly visible. Meghan's family drama began to spill into the headlines. Her father, Thomas Markle, became a source of constant controversy, selling interviews to the press and criticizing his daughter publicly. Meghan's half-siblings added fuel to the fire, creating a circus of accusations and bitterness. The media, ever hungry for conflict, exploited these stories, painting Meghan in a harsher light. Harry, determined to shield her, released statements condemning the racist and sexist undertones in the coverage. It was unprecedented for a royal to speak so directly against the press, and it underscored how deeply he loved her. But it also revealed the battles they would face together and foreshadowed the war that lay ahead. Their fairy tale beginning wasn't just about their wedding or their romance. It was about the promise of something new, something bigger than themselves. They were symbols of love's ability to challenge tradition, to rewrite history, to inspire millions. But within that promise also lay the seeds of conflict. Because for every supporter who saw Meghan as a beacon of change, there was a critic who saw her as a threat. And for every joyful photograph of the couple smiling, there were unseen struggles behind closed doors. The fairy tale was real, but it was fragile. And as with any story that captures the world's attention, the brighter the light, the darker the shadows it casts. In these early chapters of Harry and Meghan's story, it is crucial to see the layers. On the surface, a prince found his princess, and together they created magic that captivated millions. But beneath the surface, forces were already gathering, forces of tradition, media intrusion, and cultural clash that would later test the very foundation of their marriage. The fairy tale beginning was beautiful, but it was only the opening act. The true test of their love was yet to come, and as we'll see in the next part of this story, fairy tales may begin with magic, but they rarely end without conflict. The fairy tale glow could not last forever. Once the vows were said and the celebrations faded, reality began to creep into Harry and Meghan's lives in ways that neither of them could have fully anticipated. The chapter that followed their joyous wedding was one marked by subtle, almost invisible fractures that slowly widened into chasms. These cracks in the crown were not loud at first. They came in the form of quiet disagreements, raised eyebrows from palace insiders, and whispers in the tabloids that refused to die down. The honeymoon period was short, and soon Meghan found herself in a world that felt less like a welcoming home and more like a gilded cage. The institution of the monarchy is built on centuries of tradition. Every movement, every word, every outfit is measured against a rulebook that is invisible to the outside world but suffocatingly rigid inside. Meghan, who had spent her life as an independent actress with freedom over her choices, quickly learned that freedom was not something a duchess enjoyed. From the way she dressed to the words she spoke at public events, every action was dissected. At first, she tried to embrace it, appearing alongside Harry at official engagements, smiling through the endless flashes of cameras. But the warmth she had expected from within the family was far less certain. Meghan later admitted in interviews that she felt the palace's support was minimal, that she had been left to navigate the storm largely alone. And that sense of isolation was the first visible crack. For Harry, watching Meghan struggle was both infuriating and triggering. He had lived through the relentless media assault on his mother, Diana, and he recognized the same cruel patterns emerging again. Tabloid headlines turned harsher, questioning Meghan's background, her family, her intentions. Comparisons with Kate Middleton became a constant drumbeat, casting Kate as the perfect future queen while Meghan was portrayed as difficult, demanding, or worse. The infamous dueling duchesses narrative took hold, even when insiders insisted there was no real feud. But perception is powerful, and soon the public was divided. Every story seemed to pit Meghan against Kate, fueling an image of discord that the palace did little to squash. Harry, furious at the parallels with his mother's treatment, grew increasingly protective and resentful of the system that allowed it. Inside the palace, tension simmered. Meghan reportedly found the formalities stifling, the endless curtsies, protocols, and rehearsed speeches at odds with her natural spontaneity. She had built a life on speaking openly, on championing causes close to her heart, but now she was often told to stay silent or soften her words. For a woman who had fought to find her voice, being silenced felt unbearable. Harry, ever the outsider himself, sympathized, but his support only widened the gap between him and his family. To William and other senior royals, Harry's fierce defense of Meghan seemed reckless. To Harry, their indifference seemed cruel. What began as small disagreements over duty and tradition soon hardened into deep resentment. The cracks were not just in their public lives, but in their private moments too. Meghan struggled with the relentless intrusion of the press, the lack of privacy, the feeling that her every move was being weaponized against her. In private, She confided in Harry about the toll it was taking on her mental health. Harry, determined to protect her, found himself clashing more openly with royal aides, pushing back against traditions he felt were outdated. But the more he pushed, the more resistance he encountered. The palace had its ways of closing ranks, and soon Harry felt not only like an outsider, but like an enemy within his own family. For Meghan, the lack of support confirmed her belief that she would never truly belong. For Harry, the echoes of his mother's fate grew louder. There were also public moments that revealed the growing strain. At events, the body language between Harry and Meghan sometimes betrayed their unease. Though still affectionate, there were flashes of tension, moments where Meghan's smile seemed strained, or Harry's expression grew tight. Rumors swirled that Meghan was difficult to work with, stories of staff quitting under pressure. Whether exaggerated or not, these stories fed the narrative of a duchess at odds with the institution. The palace rarely spoke in her defense, fueling speculation that Meghan was being hung out to dry. Every unchallenged headline became another crack in the crown, another blow to the couple's relationship with the institution and, inevitably, to the foundation of their marriage. The media, sensing blood, circled like sharks. Stories about Meghan dominated front pages. Every family conflict was magnified, every supposed slight turned into scandal. The now famous crying incident between Meghan and Kate before the wedding, whether true or twisted, was dragged through endless cycles of commentary. Harry and Meghan began to see the British press not just as critics, but as enemies. Their decision to sue certain outlets over invasive stories marked a turning point. It was an unprecedented move for royals, who traditionally absorbed media scrutiny in silence. By breaking that rule, Harry and Meghan signaled that they would not play by the old script. But in doing so, they also isolated themselves further from the family that valued discretion above all else. Behind closed doors, conversations grew sharper. Meghan reportedly expressed to Harry that she felt unprotected, abandoned, even targeted from within. Harry, torn between the woman he loved and the family he was born into, found himself in a constant state of conflict. He could not forgive the institution for failing to shield Meghan, but he also could not entirely sever the ties of loyalty that bound him to his brother and father. The weight of this tension began to change him. Friends noticed he was less carefree, more defensive, more burdened. Meghan, too, carried the strain, balancing her role as wife and duchess with the growing realization that she might never be accepted. Together, they were still united, but the cracks were widening, and love alone was not enough to seal them. These early fractures were the quiet beginnings of a much larger rupture. At the time, few could have predicted that they would lead to the couple stepping back entirely from royal life. But looking back, the signs were all there. The subtle slights, the unchecked headlines, the growing sense of isolation. All of it pointed to a couple fighting a battle they could not win within the confines of tradition. Harry and Meghan may have still appeared radiant in public, but behind the scenes, their foundation was being chipped away bit by bit. The fairy tale beginning had given way to a harsher reality, one where the weight of the crown was proving too heavy to bear. The cracks in the crown were not just cracks in the institution. They were cracks in Harry and Meghan's sense of safety, identity, and belonging. These cracks set the stage for the explosive decisions that would follow, decisions that would shock the world and redefine the monarchy itself. But before the storm of Megxit came the quiet rumblings of discontent, the subtle signals that love, no matter how strong, cannot shield two people from the forces of history, power, and perception. The fairy tale was not over, but it was already beginning to unravel. The decision that would come to be known as Megxit did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of frustration, whispered arguments, sleepless nights, and a mounting sense of suffocation. To the public, it seemed sudden, a dramatic announcement that Harry and Meghan would be stepping back from royal duties. But to those who had watched closely, the signs had been there for months, even years. Chapter 3 of this saga is about that explosive moment, the Megxit shockwave, when the couple's discontent finally erupted into one of the most dramatic exits in royal history. The first tremors began long before the announcement. Meghan's disillusionment with royal life had grown steadily, compounded by constant negative press coverage and what she felt was a lack of support from within the institution. Each headline that went unchallenged cut deeper, Each time she was told to keep quiet instead of speaking her truth, the distance between her and the crown widened. Harry, too, carried his own burdens. The press attacks on Meghan stirred painful memories of his mother's treatment, and he saw history repeating itself in front of his eyes. He had once vowed never to let another woman he loved suffer the same fate. With every passing week, he felt more powerless inside the system he had been born into. Behind palace walls, conversations were tense. Harry and Meghan reportedly tried to negotiate a middle path, one where they could continue to serve the crown while living with more freedom and less intrusion. But tradition is slow to bend. Senior royals, including the Queen, Prince Charles, and Prince William, had their own concerns. How could the monarchy maintain its integrity if members were allowed to split their roles between duty and independence? Would it set a precedent for others? Harry and Meghan's wish to be half in, half out was seen by many within the institution as unworkable. To Harry and Meghan, the rejection of their plan felt like rejection of themselves. And then came the announcement. In January 2020, Harry and Meghan dropped their bombshell via Instagram, telling the world that they intended to step back as senior royals and work toward financial independence. The palace had not been fully briefed beforehand, and the blindsiding nature of the statement sent shockwaves through the monarchy. Headlines exploded around the globe. Royal split. Crisis at the palace. Harry and Meghan stepped down. The story dominated front pages for weeks. To the public, it was a stunning development. To the palace, it was a breach of trust. For Harry and Meghan, it was survival. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Critics accused Meghan of orchestrating the exit, branding her as manipulative and ambitious. The phrase Megxit was coined by the press, placing the blame squarely on her shoulders. For Meghan, it was salt in an already deep wound. She had already felt vilified, and now she was being painted as the villain who tore a prince away from his family. Supporters, however, saw a different story. They praised the couple for prioritizing their mental health and autonomy, for refusing to be trapped in a system that seemed unwilling to protect them. Across social media, debates raged. Was Meghan unfairly targeted, or was she truly at odds with the institution? Was Harry courageous for leaving, or reckless? Harry's relationship with his family suffered further strain. Meetings were called at Sandringham, famously referred to as the Sandringham Summit, where the Queen, Charles, William, and Harry tried to find a way forward. Reports from those meetings painted a picture of tough negotiations, with Harry pushing for compromise and the others holding firm on tradition. In the end, the decision was made. Harry and Meghan would step away fully, losing their HRH titles and royal funding. They would no longer officially represent the Queen. It was, in essence, a severing of ties. The cost was high, but for Harry and Meghan, it was a price they were willing to pay for freedom. Moving to North America marked the beginning of a new chapter. At first, they stayed in Canada, later relocating to California, where they began building their new life. From the outside, it looked like a dream. A mansion in Montecito, celebrity neighbors, new opportunities in Hollywood. But the transition was not seamless. Harry, once surrounded by the structure of royal duty, now found himself navigating an entirely new world. Meghan, though back in familiar territory, carried the weight of constant criticism and the challenge of redefining her image. Their pursuit of independence came with financial and emotional pressures they hadn't fully anticipated. The deals with Netflix and Spotify became lifelines, both financially and symbolically. They represented a chance to tell their story on their own terms, to build a brand beyond the monarchy. But even those deals sparked controversy. Critics claimed they were cashing in on their royal status, that they had traded one kind of spotlight for another. Supporters argued that they were simply making the best of their circumstances, using their platform for causes they believed in. Whatever the opinion, one thing was clear. The couple could not escape the scrutiny. The spotlight they had hoped to leave behind followed them across the ocean, sometimes even brighter than before. Megxit was not just a personal decision, it was a global event. It exposed the fragility of the monarchy in the modern world, the tension between tradition and progress, and the challenges of balancing duty with individuality. It sparked conversations about race, mental health, and media ethics. Meghan's openness about her struggles, later revealed in interviews where she admitted to feeling suicidal at times, forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths about the cost of silence and the need for compassion. Harry's insistence on protecting his family showed his determination, but it also highlighted how deeply scarred he remained by his past. For Meghan, the exit was both liberation and burden. She was free from the confines of palace life, but she carried the label of the woman who had pulled Harry away. For Harry, the move was both an act of love and a gamble. He had chosen Meghan and their children above his royal role, but in doing so, he had severed ties with the only world he had ever known. Their choice came at a cost, and as they adjusted to their new life, the cracks in their relationship began to deepen. Freedom brought opportunity, but it also brought new challenges that would, over time, test their marriage as deeply as the crown ever had. The Megxit shockwave was more than a headline. It was the moment the fairy tale fully collided with reality. It revealed the limits of love under pressure, the power of tradition, and the lengths two people will go to when they feel they have no other choice. It set the stage for everything that would follow, from their media ventures to their growing estrangement from the royal family, and ultimately, to the daring decisions that would bring them to the brink of divorce. The cracks that began after the wedding had widened into a chasm, and stepping across it meant leaving behind not just titles and duties, but the very identity Harry had carried since birth. When Harry and Meghan made the decision to step away from their senior royal roles, one of the most pressing questions was how they would support themselves. For generations, royals had lived within a structure where their financial stability was tied to the institution. To walk away from that meant not just leaving behind titles and duties, but leaving behind security. Chapter 4 of this story is about how Harry and Meghan sought to redefine financial independence and how their pursuit of media deals became both a lifeline and a lightning rod for criticism. This chapter is about survival, reinvention, and the gamble of trading centuries of tradition for the uncertainty of the open market. At the heart of their financial independence was the promise they made to themselves and to the public. They would no longer rely on funding from the sovereign grant, the taxpayer-supported purse that sustains working royals. Instead, they would carve their own path, earn their own living, and build a legacy that could stand apart from the crown. For Meghan, this was not unfamiliar territory. She had worked for years as an actress, earning her own income and navigating the competitive world of Hollywood. For Harry, however, it was a radical shift. He had grown up in a system where money flowed from inherited wealth and institutional support. To suddenly be responsible for creating his own revenue was a challenge unlike anything he had faced before. Their first moves reflected both ambition and urgency. The couple signed a landmark deal with Netflix, reported to be worth over $100 million. This partnership promised documentaries, scripted series, and children's programming that would reflect their values and perspectives. It was a statement. They would use their platform to produce content that informed and inspired. Soon after, they struck a deal with Spotify, launching the Archwell Audio brand to create podcasts focused on uplifting voices and meaningful conversations. To supporters, these deals represented ingenuity. To critics, they were opportunistic, proof that Harry and Meghan had traded royal dignity for Hollywood fame. The debate raged on. Were they visionaries building a new kind of influence, or were they exploiting their royal connection for profit? But deals alone do not guarantee success. The pressure to deliver became immense. Their projects were scrutinized from the moment they were announced. When delays occurred, tabloids pounced, accusing the couple of failing to meet expectations. The cancellation of certain projects added fuel to the fire, with critics mocking their transition as clumsy and unsustainable. Yet through it all, Harry and Meghan continued to present a united front, insisting that their goal was never just money but impact. They wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that aligned with their vision of compassion, equality, and resilience. Their Archwell Foundation became the public face of their mission, funding charitable initiatives and championing causes around mental health, gender equality, and humanitarian relief. Still, the reality of financial independence was harsher than the glossy headlines suggested. Maintaining their Montecito mansion, supporting security for their family, and sustaining a lifestyle befitting global figures required vast sums of money. The pressure to keep up their revenue streams weighed heavily on them. Meghan, ever ambitious, sought to expand their brand through books and potential speaking engagements. Harry, too, found new roles, from producing documentaries to writing his memoir. Each step they took seemed to attract both applause and ridicule. For every fan who celebrated their courage, there was a critic accusing them of hypocrisy. How could they demand privacy, yet sign multi-million-dollar media deals? How could they denounce the press, yet rely on media exposure to build their brand? The tension between their goals and the public's perception became another crack in their story. Meghan's children's book, The Bench, was seen by some as heartfelt and symbolic, while others dismissed it as opportunistic. Harry's memoir was anticipated as explosive, with promises of unfiltered honesty about his life within the royal family. These ventures underscored their willingness to control their own narrative, but they also risked alienating the very family ties that had once defined them. The monarchy thrives on discretion and tradition. Harry and Meghan thrived on openness and reinvention. The clash between those worlds played out on a global stage, and it became increasingly difficult for the couple to balance authenticity with strategy. Behind the scenes, the strain of constant scrutiny and the weight of financial expectations began to wear on their marriage. Freedom was exhilarating, but it was also exhausting. In interviews, Harry admitted that he struggled with the pressures of adapting to a new life in America. Meghan, while more at ease in the environment, faced her own challenges in navigating the double role of celebrity and advocate. They were no longer just Harry and Meghan, the royal couple. They were now entrepreneurs, producers, and media figures, competing in industries where failure was often more public than success. Every contract signed, every project launched carried with it the weight of proving themselves not just to their supporters, but to the critics waiting for them to stumble. Yet for all the challenges, their pursuit of financial independence reflected a deeper theme: survival against all odds. By walking away from royal funding, they had cut the cord that bound them to the institution. They were now writing their own story, for better or worse. In many ways, this chapter symbolized their determination to stand on their own feet, to ensure that their children would grow up outside the constraints of the monarchy. It was a gamble that came with enormous risks, but it also came with the possibility of building something lasting, something uniquely theirs. Still, the gamble exposed new vulnerabilities. The more they relied on deals and media ventures, the more critics accused them of being addicted to attention. The more they spoke about independence, the more they were reminded of their royal titles. And the more they tried to create a future in California, the more the ghosts of the monarchy haunted their every move. Financial independence was supposed to free them, but it often felt like a different kind of prison, one built from contracts, expectations, and the unrelenting pressure of an audience that refused to look away. As this chapter of their story unfolded, one truth became clear: leaving the royal family did not mean leaving the spotlight. If anything, the light on Harry and Meghan grew brighter, hotter, and more unforgiving. Their pursuit of financial independence became both their shield and their burden. It was the very thing that allowed them to survive, but it was also the thing that kept them tethered to the narrative they had once hoped to escape. This paradox would follow them, shaping not only their careers but also their marriage, adding yet another layer of strain to a love story already under siege. The pursuit of financial independence and media deals was never just about money. It was about identity, legacy, and proving to the world, and perhaps to themselves, that they could thrive without the crown. But as we will see in the next chapter, independence did not free Harry from the shadows of his past. If anything, it deepened them. Because no matter how far he ran, Harry could not escape the pull of isolation, the loneliness of a man who had left behind his family, and the growing sense that even love might not be enough to fill the void. Harry's isolation is one of the most haunting themes in this saga. For much of his life, he had been surrounded by people: family, aides, military comrades, friends, the press that never left him alone. Yet he had never truly felt at ease within that crowd. When he chose to leave royal life, many assumed that freedom would mean relief. They imagined Harry basking in the California sun, free from the rigid protocols of the monarchy and the suffocating press. But freedom has a cost. What Harry gained in independence, he lost in connection. In this chapter, we will explore how his isolation deepened after Megxit, why he struggled to find belonging, and how this loneliness became both a shadow over his marriage and a turning point in his life. The first layer of Harry's isolation was his fractured bond with his family. Once inseparable from William, the brothers had drifted apart long before Megxit, but the decision to step away widened the distance into a gulf. William reportedly felt betrayed, blindsided by Harry's choices, and their once unbreakable bond was reduced to formal encounters at public events. For Harry, who had grown up relying on William as a confidant, the loss was crushing. Then came the strained relationship with his father, Charles. Though Charles had supported him financially for a time after Megxit, their relationship grew tense as Harry began to speak publicly about grievances against the institution. Even the Queen, whom Harry adored, could not bridge the growing chasm. By leaving the monarchy, Harry had not only walked away from duties, he had walked away from the very people who had been his anchors since childhood. Beyond family, Harry also faced the loss of longtime friends and connections. Many of his old military comrades remained in the United Kingdom, and though Harry tried to stay connected, distance and circumstances made it harder. In interviews, he admitted that moving to America had been daunting, that he often felt like an outsider. He was no longer the prince who could rely on the royal machine to structure his days. In California, he was simply Harry, and though that was liberating, it was also disorienting. Adjusting to a new culture, new expectations, and new responsibilities left him adrift. The friends he had once laughed with in London pubs were replaced by new faces in Hollywood boardrooms, people who admired him but did not know him in the same way. The camaraderie he had once known seemed out of reach. Isolation also came from the very thing he and Meghan had sought, privacy. After years of being hounded by the press, they craved a safe haven where their children could grow without intrusion. Their Montecito mansion provided that, a sprawling estate with gardens, pools, and security. Yet behind those high walls, there was also silence. The world outside was watching, but inside, it was just Harry, Meghan, and their children. For Meghan, the Californian lifestyle was familiar. She had friends, contacts, and an understanding of the culture. For Harry, it was alien. The wide streets, the Hollywood networks, the endless spotlight, it all felt foreign. While Meghan thrived in building connections, Harry often seemed like a man caught between worlds, never fully at home in either. Then there was the weight of memory. Harry carried his mother's ghost with him everywhere he went. In interviews, he admitted that the treatment Meghan endured from the press triggered painful flashbacks of Diana's struggles. His desire to protect Meghan came from that deep scar, but it also meant he relived the trauma constantly. Isolation magnified this pain. Without the grounding presence of his family, without the comfort of old friendships, Harry found himself circling the same wounds. The therapy he sought and the public discussions he initiated about mental health were part of his healing process, but they also revealed how profoundly alone he felt. Speaking out was his way of breaking the silence, but it also isolated him further from the family who valued discretion above confession. The financial independence they fought for also added to his loneliness. Meghan was comfortable in negotiations with media companies, in the creative world of production, in the networks of Hollywood elites. Harry, however, often seemed uneasy. While he participated in projects and lent his voice to causes, there were whispers that he struggled to find his role outside of being the prince. In Britain, his identity had been clear, even if he resented it. In America, he was searching. Was he a producer? A philanthropist? An activist? Or simply Meghan's partner? That uncertainty gnawed at him. For a man who had once been defined by his military service and his royal duties, this reinvention left him questioning his purpose. And when purpose falters, isolation grows. Even within his marriage, isolation crept in. Though Harry and Meghan remained close, the pressures they faced often pulled them in different directions. Meghan's ambition to establish herself in media and activism sometimes clashed with Harry's quieter search for identity. While she pressed forward, he wrestled with doubts. Was he truly happy in this new life, or was he merely surviving? The rumors of disagreements, of late-night arguments, of Harry's unease in California, all painted the picture of a man struggling to reconcile love with selfhood. Meghan, too, felt the strain, but her ability to adapt gave her a resilience Harry sometimes lacked. In those moments, Even with his wife by his side, he felt alone. The press amplified his isolation. Every time he spoke out, whether in interviews with Oprah or through his memoir, he was met with both sympathy and scorn. Supporters hailed him as brave for speaking his truth, but detractors accused him of disloyalty. In the United Kingdom, his reputation suffered. Polls showed his popularity plummeting, with many seeing him as a traitor to the crown. In America, he was admired by some, but also seen as out of place in the celebrity ecosystem. He belonged fully to neither world. That limbo deepened his loneliness, leaving him a man caught between identities, between countries, between expectations. Isolation also weighed on him as a father. Harry adored his children, Archie and Lilibet, and often spoke about wanting to give them the childhood he never had. But raising them in California meant raising them away from their cousins, away from the royal family, away from the heritage that defined his own upbringing. He wanted to protect them, but at times it seemed as though he was also cutting them off from part of their legacy. That tension between shielding them and connecting them to their roots was another silent burden. Meghan wanted them to grow up free of royal chains. Harry wanted them safe, but he also knew the power of history. How do you explain to your children that they are both part of the monarchy and removed from it? That paradox left Harry struggling, often in solitude. As the years passed, Harry's isolation became a defining feature of his story. Friends noticed the change in him. His once mischievous grin was less frequent, his laughter rarer. The boy who had been the life of the party was now a man carrying the weight of decisions that could not be undone. He had chosen love, chosen freedom, chosen to walk away from an institution that had defined him. Yet the cost of those choices was profound. The further he stepped into his new life, the more distant he became from the world he had left behind. The ties that had once bound him were fraying, and with them, his sense of belonging. Harry's isolation is not just a personal struggle. It is a symbol of the greater theme of this story. It shows us that even when we choose freedom, the absence of connection can haunt us. It reveals that love, though powerful, cannot always fill every void. And it underscores the painful truth that walking away from your past does not mean it stops shaping you. For Harry, isolation became the price of independence, the silent companion that followed him across oceans, into interviews, and into the quiet halls of his California home. And as we will see in the next chapter, that isolation was not just his burden. It became Meghan's battle too, as she found herself locked in open conflict with the institution that had rejected her, and in that fight, the cracks in their marriage widened even further. Meghan versus the royals was never officially declared as a battle, but it was one that played out in front of the entire world, piece by piece, headline by headline, silence by silence. From the moment she entered the institution, Meghan's very presence seemed to unsettle the careful balance of royal tradition. She was outspoken where silence was expected, modern where restraint was demanded, and independent where obedience had always been the unspoken rule. By the time the full fracture was visible to the public, it was clear that Meghan had not only been in conflict with the British press, but with the palace itself. This chapter explores how those tensions unfolded, how Meghan was painted as both a villain and a victim, and how the institution's resistance to her presence reshaped the very narrative of the monarchy. The tension began subtly, almost invisibly. Meghan had come into the royal family with enthusiasm, eager to bring her humanitarian work, her advocacy, and her sense of style into her new role. At first, she seemed to be embraced. Publicly, she was introduced warmly by the Queen, and Harry's family appeared to welcome her. But behind the scenes, things were less straightforward. Protocol dictated rules about clothing, speech, and even posture. For Meghan, who had lived decades on her own terms, this rigidity felt alien. She reportedly asked questions, sought to modernize traditions, and wanted to have a say in how she carried out her duties. To palace staff, this was interpreted as difficulty. To Meghan, it was simply her nature. That misalignment became the seed of deeper conflict. The British press wasted no time in exploiting that gap. Where Kate was praised for modesty and grace, Meghan was criticized for ambition and attitude. Two women buying avocado toast became two different stories. One framed as healthy and nurturing, the other as indulgent and selfish. Stories of a supposed feud between Meghan and Kate flooded the tabloids. Reports of Meghan making Kate cry during wedding preparations circulated endlessly, though Meghan later revealed that it was the opposite, that Kate had made her cry, and later apologized. But the correction never carried the same weight as the original narrative. Meghan felt abandoned, believing the palace had allowed lies to circulate unchecked. Silence, in this case, was complicity. Meghan's battles weren't just with the press, but with the machinery of the monarchy itself. She claimed that when she went to the institution for help with her mental health struggles, she was turned away. To hear her say she had felt suicidal while pregnant, and that the palace would not provide support, was one of the most damning revelations in modern royal history. Whether the palace believed that admitting Meghan needed help would damage the image of the firm, or whether they simply didn't know how to respond, the result was the same. Meghan felt unprotected. For Harry, this was an unforgivable echo of his mother's fate. He watched the woman he loved crumble, and the institution that had promised to be her family stood back. The Oprah interview in 2021 cemented the public nature of Meghan's battle with the royals. Sitting under the California sun, Meghan and Harry revealed their grievances to millions of viewers worldwide. Meghan spoke of feeling silenced, of conversations within the family about how dark Archie's skin might be, of being stripped of support and protection. The interview was a bombshell, not just for what was said, but for how it was received. Supporters rallied to Meghan's defense, pointing out the racism and misogyny that had colored much of the coverage against her. Critics accused her of exaggeration, of betrayal, of disrespecting the Queen. The royal family, in their measured statement, acknowledged that issues had been raised but insisted recollections may vary. That phrase became symbolic of the divide: two realities, two narratives, two irreconcilable truths. Meghan's relationship with senior royals grew more strained after that. Charles reportedly felt blindsided and humiliated by the interview. William, when asked by reporters whether the royal family was racist, firmly replied, "We are very much not a racist family." The gap between the brothers widened further. Even the Queen, who had been seen as a stabilizing force, was drawn into the controversy, her carefully chosen words trying to balance compassion with defense of the monarchy. For Meghan, however, the damage was already done. She had drawn her line in the sand, publicly declaring that the institution had failed her, and there was no going back. The public played a powerful role in amplifying Meghan's battles. Across social media, hashtags in support of her mental health struggles trended, while others criticized her every move. The polarization became extreme. To some, Meghan was a heroine standing up against an outdated and oppressive system. To others, she was an interloper who had disrespected centuries of tradition. The sheer intensity of these divisions reflected not just Meghan's personal conflict with the royals, but broader cultural conversations about race, privilege, and modern monarchy. She had become more than a duchess. She had become a symbol, and symbols often carry more weight than any one person can bear. Her open conflict with the institution was not limited to interviews. Lawsuits against British tabloids for invasion of privacy became another battlefield. Meghan's victory in one such case was a rare triumph, but it also kept her in the headlines, prolonging the scrutiny she claimed to want to escape. The paradox of fighting for privacy while remaining one of the most public figures on the planet only fueled the media circus. Yet Meghan held firm. To her, these battles were not about optics, but about principle. She wanted control over her story, and she was willing to endure criticism to achieve it. Behind closed doors, however, these battles were taking their toll. Harry and Meghan's marriage remained united in their public fights, but the relentless strain was undeniable. Every public statement risked further alienating Harry from his family. Every lawsuit deepened the perception that they were at war with the press and the palace alike. Meghan, in her determination to stand her ground, sometimes pulled them further into conflict than Harry seemed comfortable with. His loyalty to her never wavered, but his isolation grew. Meghan's fight was his fight, but it was also her own. And at times, it felt as though the battle against the royals had become larger than their marriage itself. In the end, Meghan versus the royals was never a fair contest. One woman against centuries of tradition and an institution designed to withstand scandal was always going to be an uphill battle. Yet Meghan's refusal to yield changed the narrative of the monarchy forever. She exposed its flaws, challenged its silence, and forced conversations that had long been buried. Whether one views her as courageous or reckless, it is undeniable that she left an indelible mark on the crown. But that mark came at a cost. Estrangement from family, relentless media criticism, and the gradual erosion of the very fairy tale that had once promised so much. This chapter is vital to the broader story because it shows how the conflict between Meghan and the royals was not just personal, but institutional. It was about identity, race, tradition, and change colliding in a way the monarchy had never faced before. It set the stage for deeper divisions, for Harry's further estrangement, and for the struggles that would eventually lead them to the brink of separation. And as the story moves forward, we will see how even their children, symbols of their love and legacy, were drawn into the center of this battle, becoming both pawns in a royal game and victims of a fight they never asked for. The arrival of children in any marriage is supposed to bring joy, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. For Harry and Meghan, the births of Archie and later Lilibet carried all of that and more. Their children were not only personal milestones, but also global events, watched and dissected by millions. Yet unlike most families, their children were born into the heart of one of the most controversial royal stories of modern times. Instead of being left to grow up in peace, Archie and Lilibet became symbols in an ongoing tug-of-war between tradition and independence, monarchy and freedom, family and estrangement. In this chapter, we will explore how the children became central to the drama surrounding their parents, how debates about their titles, safety, and legitimacy intensified public scrutiny, and how their very existence became entwined with the fate of Harry and Meghan's marriage. When Archie was born in May 2019, excitement swept across the globe. This was the first child of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, a child who represented both continuity and change in the monarchy. The world waited eagerly for the official photographs, the ceremonial introduction, the announcement of his name. Yet from the very beginning, Harry and Meghan's approach to parenthood broke from tradition. Instead of the familiar photo call on the steps of the hospital, they chose a more private introduction. Instead of following every royal norm, they created their own path, revealing their son to the world in their own way. Some celebrated this as refreshing, a couple taking control of their own story. Others criticized it as selfish, accusing them of breaking royal tradition and denying the public their expected access. From the start, Archie was at the center of this battle between expectations and independence. The issue of titles quickly became a flashpoint. By tradition, Archie did not automatically receive a royal title at birth, but questions swirled about whether he would be granted one later. Meghan, in her famous interview, revealed that there had been discussions within the family about denying him a title and, more importantly, about what that meant for his security. To her, the lack of a title wasn't just about formality, it was about protection. If Archie wasn't a prince, would he receive the same level of security as his cousins? For Harry, this raised old wounds about his mother's safety. For Meghan, it felt like exclusion, a deliberate choice to treat her child differently. And when she disclosed that conversations had taken place about how dark Archie's skin might be, the controversy exploded. Suddenly, Archie was not just a child. He was a symbol of the monarchy's deepest flaws, forcing the world to confront uncomfortable questions about race, privilege, and tradition. Lilibet's birth in June 2021 added another layer to the drama. Named after the Queen's childhood nickname and Diana, Harry's late mother, Lilibet's very name carried weight. Some saw it as an olive branch to the family, a gesture of respect. Others viewed it as a provocation, an audacious use of the Queen's most personal name by a couple who had publicly criticized the institution. The debate over her name symbolized the complexity of Harry and Meghan's relationship with the crown, caught between love and rebellion, honor and defiance. Like Archie, Lilibet's role in the royal hierarchy became a matter of speculation. Would she have a title? Would she ever truly be accepted within the fold? Once again, a child was drawn into a battle that should never have touched her. Beyond titles and symbolism, there was the question of safety. Harry and Meghan's insistence on security for their children became a constant theme. For Harry, the memory of paparazzi chasing his mother to her death was an unshakable nightmare. He refused to let history repeat itself. Yet in stepping away from royal duties, he also stepped away from the automatic protections of the crown. Providing private security became not just a necessity, but a financial burden. Critics argued that they couldn't demand independence and expect royal protection. Supporters countered that no child should be left vulnerable because of decisions their parents made. The debate was not just about logistics, it was about principle. And in that debate, Archie and Lilibet were the silent center, their well-being transformed into a public argument about responsibility and fairness. The children also became symbols of the couple's attempts to redefine themselves in America. Photographs of them were rare, carefully controlled, released only on special occasions. Harry and Meghan spoke about protecting their privacy, about giving them as normal a childhood as possible. Yet the very act of withholding images fueled further intrigue. Every rare glimpse of Archie's curly hair or Lilibet's birthday sparked frenzied coverage. It was a paradox. By keeping their children private, Harry and Meghan only intensified public curiosity. And in the absence of consistent information, speculation filled the void. Questions about their upbringing, their schooling, their relationship with their royal cousins all became fodder for gossip and debate. Even within the family, the children were points of tension. Rumors persisted about strained relations between Archie and Lilibet and their royal cousins, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Some suggested that William and Kate wanted to shield their children from the controversies surrounding Harry and Meghan. Others believed that Harry longed for his children to know their cousins, but was kept at a distance. The absence of Archie and Lilibet at key royal events, whether by choice or circumstance, only highlighted their separation. For Meghan, this reinforced her belief that her family was being excluded. For Harry, it deepened his sadness that his children were growing up apart from the very family ties that had defined his own childhood. The children also became central to Harry and Meghan's broader narrative. In interviews, they often spoke about wanting to protect Archie and Lilibet from the same pain they had endured. They framed their decisions, whether to leave the royal family, to fight the press, or to seek independence, as choices made for their children's future. They wanted them to grow up free, to define their own paths without the burden of royal duty or media harassment. Yet critics saw this as contradictory. How could they claim to protect their children's privacy while speaking about them in high-profile interviews? How could they decry the attention while simultaneously weaving their children into their public brand? The tension between intention and perception became another fracture in their story. What makes this chapter particularly poignant is how the children, who should have been sheltered from the chaos, became symbols in a story much larger than themselves. They did not choose to be born into controversy, yet their very existence reshaped the narrative of their parents' battles. Archie and Lilibet were not just Harry and Meghan's children. They were heirs to a fractured legacy, living embodiments of both hope and conflict. For Harry, they were reminders of his mother's struggles and his vow to protect his family. For Meghan, they were proof of her resilience and her determination to build a new life. But for the world, they became the subjects of endless fascination, their innocence overshadowed by debates they could never understand. As this chapter closes, it becomes clear that the children at the center were more than bystanders. They were catalysts. Their presence forced decisions about titles, security, and independence. Their births reignited debates about tradition, race, and modernity. And their future became a question mark hanging over Harry and Meghan's marriage. Could they truly give their children the freedom they promised? Or were Archie and Lilibet destined to inherit the very struggles their parents had tried to escape? These questions linger, heavy and unresolved, and they lead us into the next stage of the story, when Harry himself reached a breaking point, forced to confront not just the weight of his marriage and his family, but the haunting realization that something had to change. Prince Harry's breaking point did not arrive suddenly, like a lightning strike. It was a slow, grinding erosion of spirit, a gradual tightening of pressure that finally reached a moment when something inside him could no longer hold. For years, Harry had tried to balance two opposing worlds, the duty he had been born into and the freedom he had chosen with Meghan. He had defended his wife against the institution, stood up to the press, and carried the weight of old wounds that never fully healed. But even the strongest resolve weakens under relentless strain. In this chapter, we explore how Harry, once the man who vowed to protect his family at all costs, found himself at the edge of exhaustion, isolated, resentful, and desperate for clarity. His breaking point was not just about Meghan or the royals. It was about identity, loyalty, and the impossible task of trying to be everything at once. The first signs of Harry's unraveling were visible in subtle ways. His easy grin, once a hallmark of his charm, appeared less often in public. The sparkle that had made him the fun prince, the one people loved for his warmth and mischievousness, seemed to dim. Friends who had known him for years described him as more serious, more defensive, more guarded. This change was not simply about growing older. It was about carrying burdens that were heavier than he had ever imagined. His marriage, once a sanctuary, had become both a shield and a battlefield. Protecting Meghan and their children was his mission, but the cost of that mission left him depleted. Harry's relationship with the press was one of the central forces driving him toward the edge. Each headline about Meghan, each cruel comment about their family, reopened old scars. He had watched the media destroy his mother, and now he felt powerless as it attempted to destroy his wife. Suing newspapers, speaking out in interviews, and demanding accountability were ways he tried to fight back, but the battles only escalated the war. Instead of easing the pressure, they intensified it. For every victory in court, there were 10 more negative stories. For every heartfelt statement, there was an avalanche of criticism. Harry began to feel that he was living in a never-ending loop, constantly reacting, constantly defending, never free. The isolation he faced in California made everything worse. While Meghan adjusted to her familiar environment, Harry often felt like a stranger. He missed the camaraderie of his military service, the structure of his old life, even the familiarity of London. In California, he was both famous and rootless. Surrounded by celebrities and industry figures, he often seemed like a man without a tribe. Meghan had her networks, but Harry was adrift. He spoke openly about his struggles in therapy, about the difficulty of adapting to a new culture, about the lingering trauma of his past. These admissions made him relatable to many, but they also revealed how deeply he was wrestling with loneliness. That loneliness was a critical factor in his breaking point. Inside his marriage, the weight of these struggles began to show. Harry and Meghan were still united in public, holding hands at events, smiling for cameras, speaking passionately about their causes. But behind closed doors, the strain of constant criticism and unrelenting pressure created moments of tension. Meghan's ambition to expand their influence through media deals, books, and public projects sometimes clashed with Harry's growing desire for simplicity and peace. He wanted to shield his family. She wanted to redefine them. Both goals were valid, but together they created friction. Harry began to feel that no matter what he did, it was never enough, for Meghan, for the public, or for himself. The breaking point also came from his fractured ties with his family. Each time he saw William or Charles, the distance between them grew more pronounced. He longed for reconciliation but resented their silence. He wanted their understanding but could not forgive their lack of support from Meghan. The contradictions gnawed at him. On one hand, he was furious at the institution for abandoning his wife. On the other, he missed the familiarity of his family. These conflicting emotions left him trapped in a cycle of guilt and anger. His interviews revealed this tension. He would criticize the monarchy in one breath and express his love for his grandmother in the next. That emotional whiplash reflected the storm inside him. Public perception added to his turmoil. In Britain, his popularity plummeted. Once adored as the soldier prince, the cheeky younger brother, he was now seen by many as a traitor. In America, he was admired by some but mocked by others, often reduced to Meghan's shadow. This dual rejection left him feeling unmoored. He no longer belonged fully to either country, either identity. For a man whose sense of self had always been tied to belonging, whether as a royal, a soldier, or a husband, that loss was devastating. He began to ask himself who he truly was without the crown, without his old life, and whether he could ever be enough in his new one. The stress manifested in his public words and actions. In interviews, his candor sometimes shocked listeners. He spoke about panic attacks, about turning to drugs and alcohol in his youth, about feeling trapped within the monarchy. These revelations were meant to humanize him, but they also exposed his fragility. His memoir deepened that portrait, laying bare family conflicts and personal struggles in a way that both captivated and divided audiences. For Harry, telling his story was cathartic, but for many, it was also evidence of how far he had drifted from the discretion and loyalty expected of a royal. The more he spoke, the more isolated he became. The true breaking point, however, came in the quiet moments, the moments away from cameras, headlines, and interviews. It was in the late-night conversations with Meghan when he admitted his doubts. It was in the silences after yet another headline tore them apart. It was in the mornings when he looked at his children and wondered if he had made the right choices. Those private moments revealed a man worn down by years of battle, searching for a peace that always seemed just out of reach. At some point, Harry realized he could no longer keep going as he had been. Something had to change. Whether that meant stepping back even further, reevaluating his marriage, or finding a new path, he knew the status quo was no longer sustainable. Harry's breaking point matters because it is the pivot on which the rest of the story turns. It shows us the human side of the prince, the man behind the titles and controversies. It is not about weakness, but about the inevitable collapse that comes when one person carries too much for too long. His decision to act, to file for divorce, to take the daring step that shocked the world, was born from this exhaustion, this loneliness, this breaking point. Without understanding the depth of his struggle, the boldness of his move cannot be fully grasped. This chapter closes with the recognition that Harry's breaking point was not just personal, it was also symbolic. It represented the collapse of the fairy tale, the unraveling of the dream that love alone could withstand centuries of tradition and global scrutiny. It marked the moment when the balance between survival and sacrifice tipped too far. And it set the stage for Meghan's own crisis, her breakdown in the face of a reality she had fought so hard to resist. The next part of this story is not about Harry alone. It is about Meghan, her tears, and the emotional toll of a marriage that could no longer bear the weight of its promises. Meghan's breakdown was not a single moment of collapse, but the culmination of years of pressure, criticism, and the slow chipping away of her strength. To understand her unraveling, one has to consider the path that brought her here. Meghan Markle entered the royal family with hope, determination, and the belief that she could use her platform to make a difference. She was a woman who had built her career through persistence, who had faced rejection and bias in Hollywood but carved out a place for herself. She believed that same resilience would serve her within the monarchy. Yet the reality of royal life proved far harsher than she could have imagined, and by the time Harry filed for divorce, her emotional defenses had been battered by years of relentless attacks, estrangement, and loneliness. Her breakdown was both deeply personal and profoundly symbolic, a sign that even the strongest spirit can be worn down when love collides with power and tradition. From the beginning, Meghan's entry into the royal family was marked by contrast. She was biracial, divorced, American, outspoken, everything the monarchy had never embraced before. That uniqueness made her a beacon for many who saw her as a symbol of progress, but it also made her a target for those who viewed her as an outsider. The media coverage turned vicious quickly, dissecting everything from her family background to her body language. She was criticized for cradling her baby bump too often, for wearing dresses deemed too casual, for speaking too directly at events. Each article chipped away at her confidence, turning her every action into a flaw. Behind the palace gates, Meghan expected support, but she often felt abandoned. She would later say that she had been silenced, told what she could and could not say, and left to suffer alone when she asked for help. The seeds of her breakdown were planted early. What made her unraveling so painful was the sense of betrayal. Meghan believed that marrying Harry meant joining a family, gaining allies, and working together for a greater cause. Instead, she felt isolated. Palace insiders reportedly dismissed her complaints, framing her as difficult rather than vulnerable. When headlines accused her of feuding with Kate, she expected the palace to issue a correction. When lies spread about her family, she hoped for defense. But silence became the institution's default response, and to Meghan, that silence was an indictment. She began to feel that she had been left exposed, forced to endure the storm without shelter. For someone who had built her life on independence and self-advocacy, this helplessness was unbearable. Harry's love and support were constant, but even that was not enough to shield her completely. In interviews, Meghan revealed that she had felt suicidal at times, overwhelmed by the weight of scrutiny and despair. The idea that she, a new mother, could be driven to such thoughts shocked the world when it became public. But it was a window into the toll this life had taken on her. Mental health struggles, often hidden behind smiles and public appearances, became part of her reality. Each day demanded performance, poise, and composure, even as she was breaking inside. When Harry filed for divorce, the dam of composure finally broke. Her tears were not just about the marriage. They were about everything she had endured to hold it together. Meghan's breakdown also reflected the impossible expectations placed on her. She was expected to modernize the monarchy but not change it too much, to be relatable but regal, outspoken but silent when convenient. She was expected to be grateful for her position while simultaneously criticized for taking advantage of it. This paradox created a trap with no escape. No matter what she did, she was wrong. When she spoke, she was too bold. When she stayed silent, she was complicit. When she worked, she was ambitious. When she rested, she was lazy. The constant shifting of goalposts eroded her sense of self, leaving her exhausted and confused. To live in that kind of contradiction day after day is to slowly unravel. The media amplified her breakdown, both as a cause and as an effect. Paparazzi photographs captured moments of her looking tired or distant, which were then spun into stories of a failing marriage or a crumbling duchess. Tabloids speculated endlessly about her mood, her weight, her relationship with Harry. The scrutiny became a cycle. Her sadness was used as evidence against her, and the coverage of that sadness deepened it. Meghan had always been poised in front of cameras, but even she could not maintain composure forever under such relentless pressure. The cracks began to show, and the press fed on them, creating a feedback loop that worsened her emotional state. The children, too, played a role in her breakdown. Meghan wanted nothing more than to protect Archie and Lilibet from the circus that had surrounded her. She feared that they would inherit her pain, that they would become the next targets of cruel speculation. Her determination to guard their privacy often clashed with the public's insatiable curiosity. Each decision, to release a photo or not, to attend an event or not, became another battlefield. Meghan's maternal instincts clashed with her public role, adding yet another layer of conflict to an already overwhelming existence. For a mother already struggling with her mental health, the fear for her children's safety and well-being intensified her despair. The breakdown also revealed itself in Meghan's public words. In interviews, her voice would tremble as she spoke of the isolation she felt within the palace. Her statements about survival, about feeling unprotected, carried the weight of someone who had endured too much for too long. The Oprah interview was the clearest expression of her pain, a raw unveiling of her struggles before millions. To some, it was a courageous act of truth-telling. To others, it was an act of betrayal. But for Meghan, it was survival, her way of reclaiming her voice after years of silence. Yet the backlash that followed showed her that even vulnerability would be weaponized against her. Instead of finding peace, she found herself in yet another storm. When Harry filed for divorce, it was the final blow that unraveled the last threads of her strength. For Meghan, the marriage had been the one constant in a world that otherwise rejected her. Harry had been her defender, her partner, her reason for enduring. To face the possibility of losing him too was devastating. Her breakdown in the wake of that decision was about more than heartbreak. It was about the collapse of everything she had fought to protect. The tears were not just for a marriage, but for the dream of building a life free from the monarchy's chains, a dream that now seemed to be slipping away. Meghan's breakdown is central to this story because it captures the human cost of the decisions that shaped their lives. It reminds us that behind the headlines, there is a woman who endured racism, sexism, betrayal, and relentless public scrutiny. It shows us that strength has limits, that even those who appear resilient can be broken by circumstances beyond their control. It also raises questions about accountability. Was Meghan's breakdown inevitable because of who she was and where she came from? Or was it the result of an institution unwilling to adapt, a press unwilling to show compassion, and a society unwilling to see her humanity? This chapter closes with the recognition that Meghan's breakdown was not just her own private pain, but a mirror reflecting the flaws of the monarchy, the cruelty of the media, and the fragility of love under extraordinary strain. Her tears were more than a personal tragedy. They were a public reckoning. And as the world watched, those tears became part of the larger narrative that would shape not only her future, but Harry's as well. For what comes after a breakdown is either rebuilding or collapse, and in the chapters ahead, we will see how the royal family, the media, and the public responded to the unraveling of a duchess whose story had once promised to change the monarchy forever. The royal family's response to Harry and Meghan's unraveling, and specifically to Harry's daring move to file for divorce, was as much about silence as it was about strategy. The monarchy has always thrived on discretion, its power built on the perception of stability and continuity rather than on public displays of emotion. For centuries, crises have been managed through understatement, through carefully worded statements, and a refusal to dignify scandal with open confrontation. But this situation was unlike anything the institution had faced before. It was not merely a family dispute. It was a global spectacle, unfolding in real time before millions of eyes, with every gesture and word dissected endlessly. Chapter 10 examines how the royal family reacted to this shocking turn of events, both in what they said and in what they chose not to say, and how those responses shaped the trajectory of the crisis. The first reaction was silence. When news broke that Harry had filed for divorce, Buckingham Palace did not immediately issue a statement. This silence was deliberate, a tactic the royal family had used in past scandals to avoid fanning the flames. The philosophy was simple: the less they said, the quicker the storm might pass. But in an era of 24-hour news cycles and social media, silence can feel like complicity or even coldness. As headlines screamed about Meghan's breakdown and Harry's bold decision, the absence of comment from the palace was interpreted in multiple ways. Some saw it as dignified restraint. Others saw it as proof of a family unwilling to show compassion to its own. Behind closed doors, the reaction was far more complicated. For Charles, now king, Harry's divorce filing represented both a personal and institutional crisis. He had long struggled to balance his role as father with his role as monarch, and this moment forced him to confront the consequences of years of tension. Reports suggested that Charles was torn between sorrow for his son's pain and frustration at the public nature of the conflict. He knew that every word he uttered would be weighed not just as a father's, but as a king's. His instinct was to protect the monarchy, to preserve its image at all costs. That meant minimizing the drama, even if it meant appearing distant. For Harry, this distance reinforced his belief that the institution would always come before him. William's reaction was more visceral. The rift between the brothers had already been wide, but this development deepened it beyond repair. William, who had spent years preparing for the throne, saw Harry's choices as reckless, selfish, and damaging to the crown they were both born to serve. The divorce filing, in his eyes, was the culmination of a path Harry had chosen, a path that had abandoned duty for self-interest. Reports suggested that William was furious, not just at Harry but at Meghan, whom he believed had driven his brother away. Yet beneath the anger was sadness. William had lost not only his brother but also the partnership they had once shared, the bond forged in childhood grief that now seemed irretrievably broken. Kate's role in this response was quieter but no less significant. Throughout Meghan's time in the family, she had often been cast as her foil, the perfect duchess to Meghan's difficult one. Yet those who knew Kate understood that she carried her own pressures, balancing public expectation with private loyalty to her husband. In the wake of Harry's decision, Kate reportedly focused on supporting William, reinforcing the stability of their own family as a counterweight to the chaos surrounding Harry and Meghan. To the public, she represented continuity, the image of composure that reassured a monarchy under siege. Her silence, like the palace's, spoke volumes. Other members of the family responded in ways that reflected their personalities. Camilla, now queen consort, was said to be wary of further scandal, her own reputation still carrying shadows from the past. She reportedly advised caution, urging Charles to let the storm pass without overreacting. Princess, and known for her bluntness, was rumored to have little patience for the drama. focusing instead on her duties and offering little sympathy. For her, the institution always came first. This divergence of attitudes within the family highlighted the complexity of their response, part compassion, part frustration, part cold calculation. Publicly, the eventual statement from the palace was measured, almost bland. It acknowledged the situation but avoided specifics, framing it as a private matter for Harry and Meghan. The brevity of the words contrasted sharply with the magnitude of the event, leaving commentators to fill the silence with speculation. Was the family heartbroken? Relieved? Angry? The ambiguity was intentional, allowing the monarchy to maintain its aura of mystery while avoiding direct confrontation. Yet for many, the statement felt inadequate. At a time when Meghan's emotional collapse had become public knowledge, the lack of empathy in the palace's words struck a cold note. The contrast between Meghan's raw vulnerability and the monarchy's polished restraint became a narrative in itself. The media analyzed every angle of the family's response. Some praised the royals for refusing to be drawn into public squabbles. Others condemned them for lacking humanity. Polls in Britain showed a public divided. While many still supported the monarchy, there was growing sympathy for Harry and Meghan, particularly among younger generations. The family's strategy of silence, which had worked in the past, was proving less effective in an era when transparency and emotion were valued. The royal brand of stoicism looked increasingly out of step with modern expectations. Behind the palace walls, discussions about the future of the monarchy intensified. Harry's divorce was not just a family issue. It was a threat to the institution's stability. Every scandal chips away at public trust, and this one was global in scale. Advisors debated how to mitigate the damage, how to reinforce the image of William and Kate as the monarchy's future, how to ensure that Harry and Meghan's turmoil did not overshadow the crown. Some argued for more openness, others for doubling down on tradition. The debate revealed a family and an institution grappling with how to survive in a world that no longer played by the old rules. For Harry, the royal family's response confirmed his worst fears. The silence felt like abandonment, the measured words like dismissal. He had hoped, perhaps, for an acknowledgement of his pain, for some sign that his family understood what had driven him to this point. Instead, he was met with the same coldness that had haunted his childhood after Diana's death. For Meghan, the response reinforced her belief that she had never truly been welcomed. Their breakdowns, their struggles, their decisions were reduced to private matters, stripped of humanity in the service of preserving the crown. This chapter matters because it shows how the royal family's response, or lack thereof, was not neutral. It shaped public perception, widened the rift within the family, and deepened the sense of isolation that had driven Harry and Meghan to this point. It revealed the monarchy's greatest strength and its greatest weakness, its ability to endure by saying little, and its inability to adapt by saying more. The response was not just about managing scandal. It was about defining what the monarchy stands for in the modern world. And as the world debated, the silence of the royals became louder than any words they might have spoken. The royal family's response also set the stage for what followed. The media frenzy intensified, public opinion polarized further, and Harry and Meghan's story became not just about them, but about the institution itself. In the chapters ahead, we will see how the press seized upon the silence, how public voices clashed over the meaning of the divorce, and how Harry and Meghan's choices continued to reverberate through every corner of the monarchy. The response, or the lack of it, was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of another storm. The media circus that followed Harry's decision to file for divorce was unlike anything the couple had ever faced before. In truth, the media had been an ever-present character in their story, both an antagonist and a stage on which their every move was performed. But when the news of Harry's daring move broke, the circus transformed into a full-scale global frenzy. This chapter examines how newspapers, television pundits, online platforms, and social media exploded with the story, how narratives were twisted and weaponized, and how the very same machine Harry and Meghan had tried to escape turned their private heartbreak into public spectacle. Within minutes of the divorce filing, the first reports hit the wire services. Headlines in Britain screamed betrayal and tragedy, tabloids running photos of Meghan looking tired or Harry appearing tense. broadsheets adopted a more measured tone, framing the divorce as the inevitable conclusion of a turbulent union. In the United States, the coverage took a different flavor. Outlets emphasized Meghan's emotional collapse, her tears, her vulnerability, painting her as the tragic heroine of the story. In both countries, though, the common thread was intensity. No other story dominated the airwaves in quite the same way. Political scandals, economic crises, even celebrity gossip, all were temporarily eclipsed by the implosion of the Sussex marriage. Television networks devoted entire specials to dissecting every angle. Experts in body language analyzed old clips of Harry and Meghan, pointing out the smallest gestures as proof that cracks had always been there. Royal biographers were brought in to offer commentary, many of whom spoke with the authority of years spent chronicling palace life. Some defended Harry, insisting that the pressures he faced made divorce inevitable. Others criticized Meghan, accusing her of never truly understanding the institution she had married into. The tone varied depending on the audience. British commentators leaned toward loyalty to the crown, while American networks leaned toward empathy for Meghan. But the result was the same: endless hours of speculation, commentary, and noise. Social media amplified the frenzy 100-fold. Hashtags trended worldwide within hours. Memes, videos, and commentary flooded platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Supporters of Meghan rallied with messages of solidarity, sharing clips of her interviews and speeches as evidence of her strength. Critics piled on with harsh words, mocking her tears and framing the divorce as proof of her failure. Harry, too, became a polarizing figure. Some hailed him as brave for finally making a decision, while others accused him of abandoning his wife when she needed him most. The polarization was extreme, turning what should have been a private family matter into a battlefield for cultural debates about race, gender, privilege, and tradition. The media circus was not only about coverage, it was about framing. Narratives were shaped to fit existing biases. For some outlets, Meghan was the manipulative actress who had lured a prince away and then collapsed when her scheme failed. For others, she was the victim of an archaic institution that had chewed her up and spit her out, abandoned at the moment of greatest need. Harry was either the dutiful son who had finally come to his senses or the broken man who had lost his way. Every detail, no matter how small, was twisted to fit one of these archetypes. In the circus of public opinion, nuance had no place. Only extremes sold papers, attracted clicks, and kept audiences glued to screens. The circus extended beyond the press and social media. Politicians, celebrities, and public figures weighed in, adding fuel to the fire. Some celebrities close to Meghan offered words of support, sharing personal anecdotes of her kindness and resilience. Others, particularly those aligned with more traditionalist views, criticized her openly. Politicians used the story to make broader points about institutions, about modernity, even about mental health. What should have been a family crisis became a cultural lightning rod, a mirror reflecting the divisions of society itself. What made this media storm particularly brutal was its relentlessness. Coverage was not limited to a few days or even weeks. It dominated the narrative for months. Every move Harry and Meghan made was scrutinized in light of the divorce. If Meghan was seen in public, commentators speculated on her mental state. If Harry appeared at an event, reporters analyzed whether he seemed relieved or regretful. Even their children became subjects of speculation, with tabloids questioning custody arrangements, inheritance rights, and future roles. The circus consumed not only Harry and Meghan's lives, but also the lives of those around them. For Harry, this was the nightmare he had always feared. The press had played a role in his mother's death, and now it was feasting on his own heartbreak. His attempts to shield Meghan from the media had failed, and instead, their divorce became the biggest story of the year. For Meghan, the circus was both devastating and vindicating. Devastating because her private pain was laid bare for the world to dissect. Vindicating because it proved her long-standing argument: the press would never let her live in peace. The circus showed the very cruelty she had spoken about in interviews, the same cruelty that had driven her to despair. The media circus also highlighted the difference in strategy between Harry and Meghan and the royal family. The palace, true to form, remained silent. issuing only the briefest of statements. Harry and Meghan, by contrast, had always been more open, more willing to speak their truth. In the circus environment, that openness became a double-edged sword. It gave them a platform to counter narratives, but it also gave critics ammunition. Every word they said was dissected, misinterpreted, and recycled into new headlines. Their voices, meant to reclaim the story, were drowned in the noise of the circus they could never control. This chapter matters because it shows how the media transformed a personal decision into a global event. It reveals the power of narrative, the cruelty of public opinion, and the impossibility of privacy for figures like Harry and Meghan. The circus was not just background noise. It was the very stage on which their story was performed. It shaped perceptions, influenced reactions, and deepened the divides that defined this saga. Without the circus, the divorce might have been a quieter tragedy. With it, it became a cultural spectacle, one that will be remembered not just as the end of a marriage, but as a defining moment in the ongoing battle between monarchy, media, and modernity. As the circus raged on, another storm brewed beneath the surface, the public's divided opinion. If the media circus provided the noise, the people provided the weight. Their voices, expressed through polls, social media, and protests, revealed just how torn society was over Harry and Meghan's story. Were they villains or victims? Was the divorce a failure or an act of courage? The answers were as divided as the world itself. That division is the focus of the next chapter, as we turn to the raw, conflicting emotions of the public in the face of a love story collapsing in real time. Public opinion is often the most unpredictable force in any major story. It can elevate, destroy, or transform reputations in a matter of days. When Harry filed for divorce and Meghan's emotional breakdown became public, opinion around the world fractured into sharp, polarized camps. Supporters rallied behind Meghan, pointing to years of institutional neglect and media cruelty as the causes of her suffering. Critics, on the other hand, saw the divorce as vindication, evidence that Meghan had been wrong all along, that she had disrupted the royal family and paid the price. In this chapter, we explore how public opinion tore itself apart over Harry and Meghan's split, how cultural differences shaped the response, and why the fallout revealed deeper societal divides about race, gender, tradition, and power. In Britain, the backlash against Meghan was fierce. To many in the British public, the monarchy is more than just a family. It is a national institution, a symbol of stability. When Meghan first arrived, some saw her as a refreshing change, but over time, as the negative headlines piled up, the narrative shifted. By the time of the divorce filing, polls showed a sharp decline in her popularity. Tabloids painted her as manipulative, suggesting that she had led Harry astray and then failed to uphold her end of the bargain. To critics, the divorce was the inevitable outcome of her inability to adapt to the demands of royal life. Social media in the UK was flooded with comments that framed Meghan as the outsider who had come in, caused chaos, and then broken down when it all fell apart. Yet across the Atlantic, the response was more sympathetic. In the United States, Meghan was often seen as a woman who had faced relentless racism and misogyny from the British press. Her interviews about feeling unprotected and even suicidal resonated deeply with audiences who valued openness and vulnerability. For many Americans, the divorce was not a sign of failure, but a tragic consequence of an environment that had never truly welcomed her. Meghan's breakdown was framed as evidence of her humanity, and Harry's decision was debated as either a betrayal or a desperate act of self-preservation. The split in perception between the two nations underscored the cultural differences in how royalty and celebrity are understood. Where Britain saw duty abandoned, America saw resilience tested. Within those broad national narratives, individual voices painted a more complex picture. Among younger generations, especially on social media, support for Meghan was far stronger. Many young people saw her as a victim of systemic racism and sexism, someone who had been silenced by an outdated institution. They admired her for speaking out, for showing vulnerability, for refusing to conform. Older generations, however, tended to view the story through the lens of tradition, loyalty, and decorum. They saw Meghan's openness as inappropriate, her criticisms as disloyal, and her breakdown as weakness. This generational divide mirrored broader societal debates about modernity versus tradition, transparency versus discretion. Harry's reputation, too, became a point of division. In Britain, his decision to file for divorce was seen by some as cowardly, a sign that he had failed to stand by the woman he had once vowed to protect. Others saw it as a return to his senses, a recognition that the marriage had been a mistake. In America, he was viewed more sympathetically. Many saw him as a man caught between impossible choices, torn between his love for Meghan and his need to protect his own well-being. For some, his decision was framed as tragic but understandable. For others, it was a betrayal. Not just of Meghan, but of the idea of love conquering all. The polarization of opinion was not just about Harry and Meghan. It reflected deeper societal divisions. Conversations about their marriage quickly expanded into debates about race, privilege, gender roles, and media ethics. Was Meghan targeted because of her race? Was she treated differently from Kate because she was American and outspoken? Did Harry abandon his duty, or was he right to prioritize his mental health? These questions became lightning rods for broader cultural arguments. Meghan and Harry's divorce was no longer just about them. It was about what kind of society we live in and what values we uphold. Public opinion also reflected the paradox of celebrity in the modern age. People criticized Meghan for being too public while simultaneously demanding access to every detail of her life. They condemned Harry for airing family grievances in interviews, but devoured every word he spoke. The public's hunger for information, combined with its harsh judgments, created a cycle that neither Harry nor Meghan could escape. No matter what they did, half the world would support them and half the world would tear them down. The divorce simply intensified this polarization, turning every supporter into a defender and every critic into a prosecutor. The intensity of public opinion was visible in demonstrations, online campaigns, and media consumption. Supporters launched hashtags defending Meghan, sharing clips of her speeches and interviews. Critics organized petitions calling for the removal of her titles. Book sales, streaming numbers, and ratings for interviews spiked, proving that even those who claimed to despise the couple could not look away. This paradox, condemnation combined with obsession, was the hallmark of the public's response. The more people claimed to want Harry and Meghan gone, the more they consumed their story. The divided public opinion also had real consequences for the monarchy. Support for the institution itself dipped among younger people, many of whom saw the treatment of Meghan as proof that the monarchy was outdated and unwilling to change. Older generations, however, rallied around the crown, viewing the scandal as an attack on an institution that had survived for centuries. This divergence raised uncomfortable questions about the monarchy's future. Could it survive in a world where transparency and inclusivity are demanded? Or would it continue to rely on tradition and silence, risking alienation from a new generation of citizens? For Meghan, public opinion was both a lifeline and a weapon. The support she received from fans around the world gave her strength, proof that she was not alone. But the criticism, especially in Britain, was crushing. For Harry, the division mirrored his own inner conflict. He wanted to protect Meghan, but he also longed for acceptance from the country of his birth. To see public opinion so divided only deepened his isolation, confirming that there was no path where everyone could be satisfied. No matter what he chose, someone would condemn him. This chapter matters because it shows that Harry and Meghan's story was never just about them. It was about the world's reaction, about how people projected their own values, biases, and struggles onto the couple. Public opinion did not merely reflect the story. It shaped it, amplified it, and ensured that their divorce would not be remembered as a private matter, but as a cultural event. The tearing apart of public opinion revealed how deeply their saga touched on issues of identity, power, and belonging. It also showed that in the age of global media, no story exists in isolation. Every headline becomes a mirror, and every tear becomes a debate. As the public tore itself apart, another question loomed larger. What would divorce mean for Meghan herself? Beyond the public's sympathy or criticism, what would her life look like now? Would she rebuild, reinvent, or retreat? Would she finally find peace, or would the scrutiny follow her forever? Those questions form the focus of the next chapter as we examine what divorce meant for Meghan in concrete terms, financially, emotionally, and symbolically. What divorce meant for Meghan was far more than the end of a marriage. It was the collapse of a carefully built identity, the unraveling of a narrative she had worked tirelessly to shape, and the beginning of a new struggle to redefine herself in a world that had already made up its mind about who she was. Divorce, for Meghan, was not just about losing Harry. It was about losing the partnership that had given her legitimacy in the royal sphere, the brand that had elevated her in the global spotlight, and the security she believed she had found after years of struggle. This chapter explores the consequences of divorce for Meghan on multiple levels: personal, financial, reputational, and symbolic. It reveals the fragility of her position and the steep climb that awaited her in the aftermath. On a personal level, the divorce struck at Meghan's deepest insecurities. From her early years, she had battled feelings of exclusion, whether in Hollywood, where she was told she was not white enough for certain roles and not black enough for others, or within her own family, where her father's betrayal became a recurring wound. Marrying Harry had felt like a triumph over those insecurities, a validation that she was worthy of love, belonging, and acceptance in one of the most powerful families in the world. To now face the collapse of that marriage was to revisit those old wounds with devastating intensity. It was as though every rejection she had ever endured had culminated in this moment, magnified by the glare of global scrutiny. Meghan's tears, her reported breakdown, were not just about losing Harry. They were about losing the fight to prove she belonged. Financially, the divorce raised significant questions. Harry and Meghan had built their independence on joint deals with Netflix, Spotify, book publishers, and speaking engagements. Their Archewell brand had been a symbol of their partnership, combining their names and their values into a shared mission. Divorce shattered that unity. What would become of Archewell in the aftermath? Could Meghan sustain the deals and projects on her own, or would companies lose interest without the royal connection provided by Harry? The practicalities of dividing assets, determining custody, and securing financial independence would be grueling. Critics were quick to suggest that Meghan's financial future was in jeopardy, while supporters insisted she had the talent and drive to thrive on her own. Regardless of opinion, one truth was clear. Meghan would have to reinvent herself once again, this time without Harry by her side. Reputation was perhaps the most fragile casualty. For years, Meghan had been at the center of polarized opinion. To some, she was a feminist icon, a woman of color who had broken barriers by marrying into the royal family. To others, she was an opportunist who had disrupted centuries of tradition. Divorce only sharpened these perceptions. Critics claimed vindication, declaring that Meghan's marriage had always been doomed, that she had used Harry for fame and then lost him. Supporters countered that the divorce was evidence of the cruelty she had faced, that no woman could survive the pressure she had endured without breaking. Meghan herself was caught between these narratives, struggling to control a story that had always been larger than her. Every move she made post-divorce would be scrutinized as either an act of resilience or a sign of desperation. Symbolically, the divorce was catastrophic. Meghan had built her public identity around the love story with Harry. Their marriage was not just a personal union, it was a global brand. Together, they represented modernity, defiance, and progress. They were the couple who had left the monarchy to create their own destiny. They were the parents determined to raise their children free of royal chains. To see that brand collapse was to dismantle the very foundation of Meghan's identity as a public figure. Without Harry, she risked becoming a figure defined solely by scandal and controversy. The woman who had once promised to revolutionize the monarchy now faced the prospect of being remembered only for its most dramatic implosion. Yet within the devastation, there was also potential. Meghan's story had always been one of reinvention. From a struggling actress to a successful television star, from a humanitarian to a duchess, from a royal rebel to a global celebrity, she had continuously reshaped herself in the face of adversity. Divorce, though painful, offered another chance to reinvent. Could she emerge as a symbol of independence, a woman who had survived not just the monarchy, but also the collapse of her marriage? Could she harness her platform to speak more freely, no longer tied to Harry's royal lineage? The possibility existed, but it would require resilience on a scale she had never before summoned. The emotional toll of divorce cannot be understated. Meghan had already revealed her struggles with mental health, her battles with suicidal thoughts, her sense of isolation within the palace. The divorce threatened to reopen all those wounds. The danger was not just external, it was internal. To survive, Meghan would need to find new sources of strength, new anchors of identity. Supporters pointed to her children as her greatest motivation, the reason she would continue to fight. Critics doubted her ability to rebuild, predicting that she would fade into obscurity without Harry. Both perspectives underestimated the complexity of Meghan's resilience. Her breakdown was real, but so too was her determination to rise again. Divorce also reshaped Meghan's relationship with the royal family. Any hope of reconciliation, already slim, evaporated entirely. If Meghan had once believed that time might heal wounds, the divorce confirmed that the chasm was permanent. She was no longer simply estranged, she was severed. Archie and Lilibet's relationship with their royal relatives became even more complicated, caught between two worlds that now had little connection. Meghan's belief that the royal family had failed her was solidified, and the divorce ensured that those wounds would never close. For the monarchy, Meghan became a figure of caution, a reminder of the risks of modernity and openness. For Meghan, the monarchy became the symbol of everything she had lost. Public sympathy for Meghan surged in some quarters after her breakdown. Images of her crying, stories of her despair, drew compassion from those who saw her as a victim of cruelty. But sympathy was fleeting. In the media circus, compassion quickly gave way to criticism, and Meghan's every step post-divorce would be framed as either opportunism or collapse. Her challenge was to control the narrative, to ensure that she was remembered not as the woman Harry left, but as the woman who endured. That task was monumental, but if anyone was capable of attempting it, it was Meghan. This chapter reveals that divorce, for Meghan, was not an ending but a crossroads. It was the culmination of years of struggle, the breaking of a dream, but also the chance to begin anew. It forced her to confront the fragility of her identity, the instability of her financial independence, and the harshness of public opinion. It also gave her the chance, however slim, to emerge as something stronger, something more authentic. Divorce was devastation, but it was also possibility. Whether Meghan could seize that possibility would determine not just her future, but her legacy. As Meghan faced the consequences of divorce, another question loomed. What would divorce mean for Harry? If Meghan's future was uncertain, Harry's was equally complex. For him, divorce was not just the end of a marriage but the beginning of a reckoning with his own identity, his family, and his place in the world. That reckoning is the focus of the next chapter, as we explore what divorce meant for Harry and how it reshaped his path forward. For Harry, divorce meant something far different than it did for Meghan. While for her, it symbolized the collapse of her identity within the royal sphere and the struggle to rebuild a life in the aftermath, for Harry, it was a reckoning with the deepest parts of himself. Divorce forced him to confront not only his relationship with Meghan but also his fractured ties with his family, his identity as a royal, and his purpose as a man outside the institution. It was the culmination of years of tension between love and duty, independence and tradition, rebellion and belonging. This chapter examines what divorce meant for Harry on a personal, emotional, and symbolic level, and how it reshaped the path he would walk moving forward. On a personal level, the divorce was devastating. Harry had always spoken of Meghan as the woman who saved him, the one who gave him purpose and strength after years of struggle with grief and trauma. He had described their relationship as a lifeline, a partnership that helped him navigate the chaos of the press and the isolation of his royal role. To see that partnership collapse was to face the possibility that the very foundation of his new life had been built on fragile ground. For Harry, filing for divorce was not about falling out of love, but about survival. The tension between protecting Meghan and protecting himself had finally become unsustainable. His decision, though daring, was also a recognition that he could no longer live under the constant strain of trying to reconcile two irreconcilable worlds. The divorce also forced Harry to confront his estrangement from his family in a new light. For years, his bond with William had been strained, his relationship with Charles complicated, his ties to the wider royal circle frayed. Divorce heightened the distance. For William, It was further proof that Harry's choices had destabilized the family. For Charles, it was a disappointment that underscored the fragility of his son's independence. For Harry, it was confirmation that he was no longer part of the royal fabric in any meaningful way. The divorce did not create the rift, but it widened it into a chasm. In many ways, Harry became a man without a family. Estranged from the monarchy, separated from Meghan, and left to redefine himself in isolation. Yet within this devastation, there was also a strange kind of relief. Divorce meant Harry no longer had to fight every battle Meghan had taken on. He no longer had to constantly defend her against the press, the palace, and the public. He no longer had to carry the weight of both his own trauma and hers. The relief was bittersweet, for it came at the cost of losing the woman he had vowed to stand beside. But it was real. For the first time in years, Harry could begin to think about himself, not just as a husband, father, or prince, but as an individual. That freedom was daunting, but it also held the possibility of healing. The emotional toll, however, was immense. Harry had long struggled with feelings of abandonment and grief tied to his mother's death. The divorce reopened those wounds. He had once believed that Meghan was his chance to build the family he had lost, to create the stability and love he craved. To see that dream collapse was to relive the loss of his mother all over again. The pain of watching his marriage fall apart carried echoes of watching Diana walk away from the monarchy, echoes of standing at her funeral as a boy carrying grief too heavy for his years. Divorce for Harry was not just about Meghan. It was about history repeating itself, about the inevitability of loss in his life. Practically, divorce meant navigating questions of custody, finances, and identity. Harry adored his children, and the thought of losing daily access to Archie and Lilibet was unbearable. Custody arrangements would determine how much time he could spend with them, where they would live, and what influence the royal family might have over their future. For a man who had vowed to protect his children at all costs, these questions carried enormous weight. Financially, Harry was less vulnerable than Meghan, given his inheritance from Diana and other assets, but the division of their joint projects raised questions about his role moving forward. Would he continue with Archewell? Would he retreat from public ventures altogether? These uncertainties added another layer of pressure.